We're live now, Robin, if you want to start.
Okay, welcome everybody to the Devon Cornwall Hustings on this leadership competition and a selection process for the leadership of the party. I'm sitting in Cornwall at the moment where it's a rather pleasant evening, but welcome to everybody from the rest of Cornwall and from Devon and Plymouth as well. I'm Robin Tedderson. I'm a member of the House of Lords Lib Dem party. And as I said, I live in Cornwall. I was MEP for Cornwall and Plymouth in the late 90s. But that's enough about me. I'm here as chair, and I will be saying very little. I shall just field the questions, and it's for our candidates to give those answers. We have two excellent candidates with us, and Layla and Ed. I'm going to refer to them as. The way this works is I have a number of questions already from a number of you that I'm going to put to the candidates. If there are other questions you still want to put forward, then we might be able to put some of those in. So please put those through on the chat function. The way it works is I'm going to ask each candidate to give a 5-minute introduction, no more than 5 minutes, please, candidates. And then I'll also at the very end be asking them to give a 2-minute summary of to conclude the session. And I'll go through then as well how you can vote or how the voting process will work. And you can't vote tonight, so let me make that clear at the moment. So that's the scene. And I'm now going to ask first Layla and then Ed to talk to us for a maximum of 5 minutes. And then I'll be asking the questions, which I will alternate between the candidates to start speaking. So, Layla, over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you, Robin. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening and giving up your time to be part of this. I'm extremely grateful. Our country needs a strong liberal voice, one that makes a heartfelt, compelling case, truly liberal and progressive values as we rebuild our society in the wake of coronavirus. And that's why our country desperately needs the Liberal Democrats to rise to this challenge. But let's be clear, to do this, the party must change. Change isn't an option, it's essential. We have to do better than the last 3 devastating elections, and we have to do better than bumping along at 6, 7, 8% currently in the polls. I have a plan to rebuild trust and win again as your leader. And first of all, I want to thank all of you. I've held listening sessions now with over 300 local parties and also came to speak to voters themselves in Devon and Cornwall, nowhere near as much as I want to. And my first year as leader, I will continue to do this because we need to reconnect with people again. We need to stop being a party of London and the Southeast. And while the government's going off talking about levelling up in the north, it's Devon and Cornwall that's being again left behind by complacent Tories. So these listening sessions have informed my vision of how we can transform Britain into a fairer, greener, more compassionate country where everyone has the security to live life as they choose. And my 3 campaign themes of education, the environment, and the economy are all ideas that I've put forward now with the voices of those voters in my ears. And they all reinforce that overall message. It's the type of vision that Paddy and Charles had. And it addresses mainstream concerns in a uniquely liberal way. And it attracts attention. Throughout this campaign, I've demonstrated that I can get the cut through that we need to get that message across. I've appeared in 5 front pages, ranging from The Independent to the Telegraph. I've appeared on all the major outlets, and that's how we're going to be able to speak to people. I was also interviewed by the Western Morning News yesterday. We have to speak to the regional media as well. And by doing this, this is how we're going to build that broad base of support across the moderate political spectrum. It's how I overturned a 10,000 Tory majority in Oxford, West and Abingdon in one go and then increase that majority to over 50%, the highest vote for any party and any candidate in this seat's history. And we did it with a message that can attract thousands of soft conservative voters, as well as getting Labour and Green voters to not just vote for us, but actually to come out campaign with us, because that bolstered our ability to get that message across on the ground. And we need to replicate this nationally. Now, I know that from Devon and Cornwall, you hear Oxford, West and Abingdon, you hear the Oxford bit, but actually you may not realise that there's a huge rural part of my constituency too. And so I know firsthand how much damage things like poor transport links can do to an area. I won over those conservative leaning rural voters because they knew I would support them. And I will ensure that rather than having leaflets dropping through letterboxes in your area that you just wish weren't there, that we will instead have a national message that appeals to your voters too, reinforcing the brilliant work that councillors already do on the ground. And in terms of where we win, and boy, do we need to win again, we have to have that laser-like focus on next May to increase our council base, because we know that the best way to win is bottom up, by winning council seats and building our base. But we also need to invest in our local parties and in our locally based organisers. There is no business that would invest as little as we do in training for our volunteers and our staff. And that's what I would focus on as leader. My aim and my reason for asking you to vote for me to be your next party leader is to change our party for the better, so that we can move forward together and change our country for the better. I stand out from the crowd, and I would make liberalism mainstream again. There is a burning need for change, and I'm the person to lead it. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. And I now hand over to Ed. Ed, please.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Jackie. Really good to be here with members across Devon and Cornwall. Friends, these are challenging times for our country and for our party. Job losses, COVID affecting people's health, the care homes, the hospitality sector so important in Devon and Cornwall. Then add in the climate emergency, then add in Brexit. As leader, I believe I've both the vision and the experience to help the party meet those challenges. Let's take two of them, the economy and climate. For too long, these challenges have been separated. I have a radically different approach. Every policy, I think, from economy to foreign affairs, from housing to transport, must focus on the environment, must focus on climate change. That's why I've put forward a green recovery plan, investing £150 billion in a green economy of the future, with green homes, green transport, green energy, a rewilding of natural habitats, with a green jobs guarantee, particularly for young people. I think this means so much to people across our country, and particularly in places like Devon and Cornwall. And I believe I can deliver a green vision because I've experienced doing it before. I fought the Tories on climate and I won. Under my leadership, we nearly quadrupled Britain's renewable power. I brought green jobs to communities in decline, like 1,000 manufacturing jobs in Hull, making turbine blades for wind farms in the North Sea. My eco passion came from reading Seeing Green, aged 18. It's where I discovered a number of really radical liberal ideas, including how a universal basic income could help the most vulnerable, the homeless, people who do unpaid care. And when I worked as Paddy Ashdown's economics advisor, I developed our party's first ever UBI policy. So I bring to a UBI idea to help the poorest real experience, as well as training as an economist. And beyond a greener, fairer society, I think post-COVID, we should be the party for caring, the party of carers. Our country has 10 million carers, 3 times as many people who voted for us the last election. And I've experienced caring, first as a young carer. My dad died when I was 4, so when mum became terminally ill when I was a teenager, I nursed her with my brothers till she died. And now Emily, my wife, and I care for our wonderful children, including my severely disabled son, John, who needs 24/7 care. So from these real life experiences of my own, I understand what millions of carers go through every day. And I believe my life experience will help me relate to people, to voters, to their challenges too. In the general election review, which I helped commission, you can see our party's challenges. They're deep. We need training. We need to change the way we've been campaigning. We need to think about areas like Devon and Cornwall and not let them be a sort of afterthought. One thing the review doesn't do, it doesn't say the way forward is simply as moving on from the coalition. It makes it clear that there are many, many other issues. It's got 61 pages and many recommendations, and it's clear that there are no fixes. And the next leader's got to implement that review and make sure that all areas of our country and all areas of our party get built up. And the review says that our most serious problem was not telling people why vote Liberal Democrat, what the Liberal Democrats are about. And we failed to communicate that. I believe that my vision in this leadership campaign begins to do that. A greener, fairer, more caring society. And I think with a clear vision, we can win. We can tell voters wherever they are in the country that we want to invest in their public services, in the NHS, in education, that we really care about the environment, and that we understand the economic problems that are happening. And I think with that vision, we can really win. I'm an experienced campaigner. I've won 6 out of 7 general election campaigns. In fact, I'm the only MP in our party's history to win at a general election without being a target seat. I do know how to win and to build those teams. And that's why most of the party's best campaigners are backing me. They're backing my vision of a greener, fairer, more caring society. And they've seen how on the television I get that cut through. Just last week, when I asked the Prime Minister if he would back my call for an independent inquiry, I managed to trap him, and he did that, and I got media coverage across the country. And so that vision I can communicate. And the vision comes with real experience. 30 years in the party, 20 years in Parliament, 5 years in government, as well as a lifetime of experience. And I want to bring that vision and that experience to the party's service so we can win across the country. So please back me. Let's start winning again. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ed, as well. And can I thank Jackie Gammon, who's going to be helping me with the questions this evening. Jackie's from North Cornwall. Okay, let's. I think we've got some local things in there in those opening statements. I think we'll start off with that. And Ed, I'm going to ask you to answer this question first, and perhaps I could ask both you, Ed, and Layla, to make sure your answers are fairly punchy, if you like, and so that we can keep the rhythm going. I'm sure you're both well used to Prime Minister's question time. I'm going to ask a question from Janice Raymond, which says, what do you consider makes Devon and Cornwall area distinctive, especially in comparison to London and the home counties? As you know, we're often seen as the heart of liberal democracy, but that's been quite a struggle recently. What are we going to do? Ed, over to you first.
I think there are many aspects that make Devon and Cornwall slightly different. I think obviously the rural areas and the importance of farming, but actually the importance of things like tourism, the hospitality sector that have been hit so hard. I think there's a more aging population in parts of Devon and Cornwall, as some people have come to retire in your beautiful counties. And I do think that my message on care, that we should be the champions of social care and be the ones talking about investment in social care, I think that will really resonate, as well as my messages on the public services, being willing to put taxes up if that's what it takes. And I also think my commitment to local democracy, to putting power down, fits with that traditional liberal agenda, which is, I think, so alive in Devon and Cornwall. You've made real gains, particularly last year, running Cornwall, running 6 district councils across Cornwall and Devon. It's a real achievement. And I want to work with our local councillors so we can turn that into more councillors, more councils across Devon and Cornwall, and then turn that also into Westminster seats. So I think Devon and Cornwall are on the way up again. And I want to be a leader that gives a clear message on a greener, fairer, more caring society that will appeal to the people in Devon and Cornwall and make sure we win again.
Leila.
Well, first of all, one of the things that I love most about Devon and Cornwall is that strong sense of local identity that they have, not just from each other, famously, but also from the rest of the United Kingdom. And actually, that is so much the heart of liberalism, is it not? You know, to empower people and then empower communities so that they can really assert that sense of identity. And that's why I think our liberal message always did go down so well in that part of the world, and why I think that that liberal message that I'll be delivering as leader will continue to help us to build that base. But on a more specific point, I mean, tourism, it's what actually I share. Oxford is also very reliant on tourism, but a very different type of tourism. The tourism in Devon and Cornwall is much more homegrown. We've got a big issue with second homes, I know, and it's an issue that has been being raised locally, but also that I've been raising in the national media as well. It's just unfair that actually the cuts in stamp duty that the government made this week could actually end up meaning that there are more people who are going to use that to buy up yet more second homes in Devon and Cornwall. And that means that there's going to be less stock for local people to be able to buy and drive up house prices, which is entirely unfair. The farming community is a really big part of actually where I think some of the arguments for why we wanted to stop Brexit will suddenly maybe come to pass. We won't be talking about Brexit. I think we need to be talking about it in terms of the loss of animal welfare standards, the loss of environmental standards, but that is going to have an impact on our farmers, because if we have a market that is flooded with chlorinated chicken and hormone-fed beef in order to do a trade deal with America, then that's going to put them at risk. And I want to work with the national farming unions to make that case to the government for why we are going to be a party that is on their side. And the third area that, and this is perhaps an area that people didn't realize about me, there are pockets, particularly in Devon, where defence is important. And I spent the last year on the Parliamentary Armed Forces scheme, where I learned about the importance of that to local economies. Went to Plymouth and indeed visited ships there. And actually, that's a side to our party that we actually could be pushing, because the reason why we need to make sure that we are investing in those armed forces communities is because they are a big part of our communities that we need to be winning over too. So let's show people in Devon and Cornwall a slightly different side, perhaps, to the metropolitan elitist Liberal Democrats that they might have associated with the last few years. And I've got a track record of being able to do that.
Okay, thank you, Leila. Can I just say to all our viewers that the way to get your questions in is to submit them on the YouTube chat. So if you do that, then we'll keep the ball rolling here. Okay, let's move it to something more national, maybe. And Leila, if I could ask you to start on this, and it's a question from David Dieter, and he's asking, would you consider entering into an electoral pact with Keir Starmer-led Labour Party in order to defeat our current disastrous government? A good question, David. Thank you for that. Leila, over to you.
Well, thank you. Well, you know, the aim of making sure that Boris Johnson and these right-wing Tories do not get any more time in government than is absolutely necessary is the top aim for me as leader. We have to make sure that we are taking as many seats off the Tories as we possibly can at the next election. And the vast majority of those are indeed Tory facing. And in fact, what we did in Oxford, West and Abingdon, where I've described before, we had great leaps forward in 2 elections. But I want to make the point that the way we did that wasn't just about having messages that pulled over Tory voters. It was that we got the Labour and the Green Party activists to stop, you know, wielding pitchforks, calling us yellow Tories. And in fact, we got them to work with us. They went out campaigning with us in an election where many seats had to sort of go it alone because there were so many target seats. And we managed to increase our campaigning force on the ground by not fighting each other, but actually fighting with each other against the Tories. And I think the way that we are going to achieve that can't be a formal outward-facing pact. And actually the strategy that Paddy Ashdown employed in the run-up to 97 is the right strategy. It's quiet conversations behind the scenes, building up trust with the Labour Party. The people who surround Keir Starmer now are very much, you know, my generation of politician in the House. I've worked very closely with a lot of them. We have a lot of mutual respect already. But the challenge is going to get the rest of that party to come on board any kind of, and actually I wouldn't even call it an alliance, a pact, anything like that. It would just be a expression of mutual interest in seats where we can take seats off the Tories. As to what happens at the next election itself, I mean, we're just going to have to see. I've ruled out any kind of coalition with the Tories themselves, but we just have to see what Keir Starmer actually ends up being, because it's early days for him as a leader. I have a great deal of respect for the way he's conducting himself in the House, but we often know that when Labour say they're going to do something, they then don't often deliver. And if there's something like electoral reform on the table, that could make life quite interesting. But remember, to even get to that point, we need to get them to put down their swords. And that's what I think I can do effectively as leader of our party.
Thank you, Leila. Ed.
David, your question is critical for the next few years. We absolutely have to beat the Tories. I'm an anti-conservative politician. I fought them all my life, and Johnson's the worst of the bunch. And I've already made clear that under me, we would never go into coalition or have any sort of arrangement at all with the Conservatives. And so we've got to work out how we manage a relationship with the Labour Party. That's never easy. It's never been easy. I was the party's economics advisor under Paddy, and I saw how he managed it. It was tough, but he did it, and he did it through real skill and choreography almost, working that through with Tony Blair. And it wasn't a formal pact, David, because I don't think formal pacts help. I think they can actually hinder. And particularly in areas where we've got quite a few third places now, unfortunately, we need to get into second place. So it's going to be quite a subtle, I call it an understanding that we need to develop. And we do need an understanding, a la Ashdown and Blair. And the way that Ashdown and Blair worked it was they developed some common territories. And there were issues that they had in common, constitutional reform, investment in public services, pro-European and so on. And the issue that I really want to press Keir Starmer's Labour Party on, and Keir Starmer personally, is where they stand on electoral reform. And if he moves on electoral reform and offers to put in his manifesto, and puts in his manifesto that he'd go for legislation on PR, that would, I think, unlock the ability for us to have a deeper understanding. And in the way that it ran before 1997, it operated at all levels. I was a member of a group called the First Quarter, where people who were age 25 in the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats got together. I remember there was about 6 of us going for supper one day, and I was one of the Lib Dems, and actually Yvette Cooper was one of the Labour people. And it reduced the hostility that we've seen in recent elections, and it helped us move on and create that understanding, which is fundamental. And then we were able to sort of get that over to the voters. And so tactical voting worked massively, massively. In 97 and 2001, the reason why we absolutely smashed the Tories is we sort of cheated first past the post through that understanding. And that's what I would be working at very, very carefully, often behind the scenes, often below the radar. It's how Paddy did it. And I think then we could make it happen. So I'm sorry if you wanted a pact, David. I don't think they work for so many reasons. But I think the sort of understanding that worked before is the way forward. And it's the one I would use all my experience of being with Paddy at that time to make happen for the party.
Okay, thank you. Ed, perhaps I could just ask you both if you could keep your answers slightly tighter, because we've got a lot of enthusiastic members here who want to get their questions over. And Ed, I'm going to ask you to start on the next one, which is from Phil Hutty, someone I expect you both know well. And he says, well, imagine this. He says, imagine that Brexit does not go well and next year we face another general election. What vision would you want to go to the country on? Ed.
a greener, fairer, more caring society. And the reason I don't mention Brexit in that is not because I would want to shy away, and I'll deal with that head on. But at the last leadership election, I said at 21 Hustings, we need to reach out to Leave voters and Leave communities, not to undermine our anti-Brexit position. I'm passionately pro-European, but I felt we needed a message to Leave voters and Leave communities, and we didn't do that. In fact, we did the reverse. And I think as a political party, if you just focus on the issue of that election, you don't develop a brand, a sort of people's understanding of who you are and what you are, not just for that election, but for elections into the future. And that is so important. And we had it under Paddy. You know, we were the party of education, we were the greenest party, and we sort of lost that. And so I would be focusing on a greener, fairer, more caring society. And on the Brexit question, I'd use it to show that actually, if we were in Europe, we could cooperate on climate change. As I proved, I led a European-wide climate change diplomacy, which resulted in Europe adopting far more ambitious climate change targets, which fed into the Paris Treaty. So, you know, I could show that my experience of Europe was good for the climate, and we could do that on a whole range of other issues as well. So I think talking about the positive aspects of European cooperation and how that can affect people's lives, for example, cooperating on a vaccine to deal with the pandemic, that is the way to approach the European issue in the future, but making sure we've got other very clear messages that will last forever to make sure people know who we are.
Thanks, Ed. Leila, disastrous Brexit and an election next year.
Well, first of all, Phil, I think that's probably wishful thinking on our parts. I just don't see Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party letting go of power that quickly. And the one thing we know about the Tories is that unfortunately they do have a way of holding on to power for as long as possible. I think it's far more likely that we're going to be seeing an election in 2024. I'd love to think that by that point, a disastrous Brexit might well mean the end of Boris Johnson, but nevertheless, that party is now so right-wing and so actually out of touch with a lot of their voters that that's where any opportunity for us lies. And that's why we have to make people on the ground see, particularly if there is a bad Brexit, what they voted for. In fact, I remember when I came to North Cornwall, knocking on doors and speaking to a voter, an older gentleman who had voted Tory all of his life. And I was having quite long conversations with people, asking them, you know, what do you think of us? And actually, first of all, what they said is they love their local councillors. The local brand of the Liberal Democrats in Devon and Cornwall, in all the seats that I was door knocking in, is actually really positive. The problem was the national brand. And then I remember asking him, so what would make you vote Lib Dem? And, you know, how much do you really love Boris Johnson? Why did you vote for him? And he said, he turned to me and he said, the thing about Boris Johnson is he's stolen all the sweets and now he's got to eat them, which I took as he now needs to prove himself. So through either Brexit, but actually COVID-19, I think is going to be that bigger opportunity. We need to show those voters, those Tory voters in Devon and Cornwall, that they didn't vote for a competent government. Actually, there is another way of governing this country, the Lib Dem way of governing this country, that they see it on the ground. They then have a leader who's going to be reinforcing those messages. And that's how we're going to peel them across. So over time, we can build that message and show them what liberalism means, again, at a national level, reinforcing the brilliant work and campaign that already goes on at a local level.
Thanks very much, Leila. Can I just remind our viewers and our members again to please do still put questions in on the YouTube chat function, and I would particularly encourage our female members to put questions forward as well. We're going to move on to a different subject, very much so, from Morgan Rogerson. And Morgan asked, what would you do if you were Prime Minister to support minority groups such as the LGBTQ+ communities or BAME communities? And Leila, I'm going to ask you to start on that one.
Yeah, well, thank you, Morgan. Well, first of all, on the LGBTQ+ community, we need to build back our relationship with them. We did lose trust with them over the last few years. And actually, one of the things that I think I can bring to the table is rebuilding trust with them, not least because I am a member of that community and understand keenly what it's like. But it's broader than that. And the reason why we care, and I think this is the thing that we need to keep doing. And I think in the listening sessions I've done with local parties in Devon and Cornwall, there's a real sense that actually we often talk about these kinds of issues at the expense of the bread and butter issues. And the reason why this is important is because when we are talking about these issues, and we have to continue to do it, you know, the way that COVID-19 has affected the BME communities in our society, they are more likely to die, they're very concerned about it. I think we should be also taking a moment every time that we talk about a minority community to explain why we care. And we care because we are liberals. And a liberal cares more about the content of someone's soul rather than anything that they didn't choose, whether that be their gender, whether that be how much money their parents were born with, whether that be which part of the country they grew up in. You should have an equal chance in life. And the fact is, people don't. And this equally applies to the, you know, 4 in 10 children in parts of Cornwall that go to bed hungry every night because of rural deprivation. I mean, this is a country that is not delivering for every single one of us. And the core of liberalism means that we have to champion that. So on BME issues, I've been talking at a national level about how we do need to change the way that businesses operate, that we've got minimum numbers of BME people on FTSE 350 boards, for example. But guys, we have no credibility on any of this stuff unless we get our own house in order. And that is one of the things that came out loud and clear in that general election review, is that we don't do this well enough. And it applies as much to BME as it does to LGBT, actually, as it does to socioeconomic background. You know, where are people from the working classes in our communities? There's not enough. And it's because politics is expensive, and it feels like you've got people who have lived their whole lives in Westminster who don't really connect with people on the ground. We need to change the face of the party, and it changes at a local party level as much as it does at the top. So my challenge to the party is, if we're serious about representing all parts of the United Kingdom and all parts of our wonderful, diverse society, then actually we need to start by looking at local parties, setting ourselves challenges. And the simple question that local parties, I think, should be answering is, are you representing all parts of your community? And if the answer is no, then go out and recruit, go find them, go ask them to join over and over and over and over and over again, and get them to sit around your campaign team table and get them to sit on your exec and help them to work out your campaign priorities. And if we can get the diversity of voices, all the wonderful voices in the room as a party, then we will make policy that at a deep down level connects with people again.
Thanks, Leila. Ed, it's your turn.
Thank you, Morgan. For LGBT plus people, I think we need to make sure that they know about our great party record. We've stood up for equal rights over many, many years. And our achievement in government of having same-sex marriage legislation, I think, was an absolutely fantastic achievement. Myself, I moved the amendment in the House of Commons to get rid of the homophobic Section 28. And so I believe I got a strong record myself of actually getting things done for the community. But the community has many, many interests. It's not homogenous, let's face it. And some of the messages I'm talking about of a greener, fairer, more caring society will resonate with all people. But we must be the champions. And when I've been thinking about the issues for the LGBT plus community I'd like to take on as leader, working with the party, I'm particularly interested in campaigning on international rights for LGBT plus communities across the world. Because in some countries, people are treated abysmally. There's even many countries where they've got the death penalty. So we should, as internationalists and people who care about human rights, be campaigning internationally as well as just domestically. On the issues for the Black and ethnic minority communities across our country, I like to feel I have quite a good feel of this. In my constituency, I have a very large Tamil community from Sri Lanka, Hindus, particularly from the Gujarat. We have a mosque, and we have Muslims mainly from Pakistan, but also from Syria, Iran, Iraq. We have the largest Korean population in Europe. So for many years, I've been representing a very diverse community, and I've managed to persuade many of them to join the party. And of our 38 councillors in Kingston Council, 8 of them are from the Black and ethnic minority communities, as I really nurtured and encouraged them. And I think our party needs to do far more, partly because if we represent Britain and look like we do, then I think we'll attract more voters and also be more sensitive to the many issues that are out there. So some we often get wrong. I mean, the way the criminal justice system treats the Black community in particular, which is obviously what was from the US behind the Black Lives Matter protest, I think it's not understood in the deep depth that it should be. That's why I've raised at Primus questions stop and search powers. If you're a Black person, you are 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched than a white person. And under Section 60 powers of stop and search, you're 47 times more likely. This is racist. And we have to tackle these issues. We have to stand up as a party and talk about these issues with some passion and insight. And I think if we do that, then I think, A, we'll be doing the right thing. Because as Liberals, we ought to be championing the rights of minority communities. But also, I think we will begin to get votes from communities that we've just not managed to do before. And I think my experience of doing that in my own constituency is something I'd like to put at the service to the party, because I really think we could do an awful lot better with some very simple lessons that I've learned here in Kingston.
Thank you, Ed, and stand by for the next question, which is from Richard Robinson. And Richard says something I guess we all know: fairer representation in Westminster means getting the Tories out and persuading Labour to adopt PR. And he asked very shortly, what are the chances? So I'm going to ask for fairly sharp answers on this one, please, from both of you. Ed.
Richard, I think the chances have never been better. That might surprise you, but the Labour Party now are in a mess. For them to come back and to win by their own right is going to be tough, because they've lost their seats in Scotland to the SNP. They've even lost many seats in the north of England when the last election breached their northern red wall, as it was called. So it's now in their interests. And if you look at surveys of Labour Party members, increasingly significant majorities of Labour Party members are in favour of proportional representation. And we'd be able to go into negotiations with them, therefore, with a much stronger hand, because it will be in their interest. And also, people forget this, because we've had a referendum on AV, the alternative vote system, which Labour used to prefer, that won't be on the table. So we really could go for the proportional representation we care about, fair votes, making votes count. So I'm really excited, but we've got to beat the Tories first. And that's what I, as leader, will spend every hour, every waking hour doing, beating those Tories so we can get fair votes.
Thank you, Ed. Leila, over to you.
Getting a fairer democracy, again, lies at the heart of liberalism, right? Because the current first past the post system means that we keep asking people to not vote for who their heart tells them they should put first. And we do this all the time, particularly in seats against the Tories. We say to Labour and Green voters, only we can beat the Tories here. And then we ask them to support us. And to me, it's always felt wrong. And it's always felt wrong because democracy should be a positive thing. It should be something that is expressive of how you really feel. And so the reason to want to campaign for fairer votes and electoral reform is a deeply liberal one, and one we should absolutely not give up. But Labour, let's face it, have always quite liked first past the post until now, because it's not really working for them. So actually, I agree with Ed. There has never been a better time to convince the Labour Party to take this on. But I'm not waiting around hoping that they're going to make the connections and join the dots themselves. I'm already working cross-party behind the scenes in Westminster to do this. There are several groups that have sprung up where we are working in, and the way things work in Westminster, it's often a conversation here, a conversation there. And it's a big part of how I think we can start rebuilding that common platform to rebuild that trust with the Labour Party. I've got vast experience of working with Labour and influencing Labour, not just in the People's Vote, which helped to launch, but actually here in my own seat. We actually had huge numbers of Labour members out campaigning for us, often in dark of night, with wearing hoods, because they didn't want to get caught, because the problem was if they were caught, they would have been expelled from the party. And behind the scenes, there is already moves to get Labour to do this. The question is going to be, come the time, are they actually going to deliver? And that we just can't tell. What we know of the Labour Party of the past is that they have often made noises in this direction and then not done so. So only by influencing the Labour Party are we going to continue to push for this. And who knows, maybe this will be the red line that got us into some kind of arrangement with them to absolutely make sure that the Tories get nowhere near power the next time. It would certainly be the most important red line for me as leader.
Thank you, Layla. And if you'd like to stand ready for the next question. And this question actually has come through the YouTube chat line, so I still encourage members and viewers to put their questions still through that. And it's from Eleanor Rylance. And talking about lines, what would your yellow line be in any electoral alliance or understanding, Layla?
Thank you very much. So indeed, my yellow line, red line, I think I've just said it was electoral reform. I think we've also got to be very, very clear that we will not go into any pact unless it was absolutely in our interests. And we have to learn from what went wrong last time in coalition, because one of the things that people really noticed about that period was how, whilst we'd drawn up a coalition agreement, there were then things that were not in that coalition agreement that were delivered that were really against our values. And that hurt us, because whenever you say as a political party that you're going to do one thing and then you do something else, that's how you erode trust. So there are lots and lots and lots of lessons to be learned from whether or not we go into coalition or not. But that's the top one. We have to maintain our own identity. And it's worth saying we're not going to get to that point unless we have that strong identity in the lead up to 2024. And just quickly, because I think it's really important, what is liberalism for me? What is liberalism for our party? What is it that if we knock on a door and say, hi, I'm a Liberal Democrat, they'll be able to throw back? And it's not policies, guys. Policies is one half of it. But the other half is actually more basic than that. It's the principles. And surely it's about freedom, something that I know voters in Devon and Cornwall really appreciate. It's freedom to the individual, and to be free to lead your best life. But in order to do that, you also need to be free from ignorance, poverty, and conformity, the stuff that we carry around in our membership cards in our wallet. And if we can get people to understand that and explain to them that that's why we care about education, that's why we care about the environment, that's why we care about fairer jobs and a fairer economy, then they will begin to understand who we are. And that's where we need to begin, rebuilding our own identity before we consider what we do with other parties.
Thank you, Layla. Ed.
Eleanor, I've done a lot of negotiating in my life, in government, in business, at the European Union, the United Nations. And the things that I've learned about how you best negotiate, if you really want to get something you want, is to start off by going for the things that they don't want to give you. And so I have a mental list of the things I know the Labour Party don't want to give us. No point asking for things that they'll give you, is it? And the top of my list, of course, is electoral reform, proportional representation. That has to be the top of our list. It's also strategic for us because it would mean that we would do far better at future elections. We'd ensure our strength was more sustainable. But I'd also want to have stronger local democracy. The Labour Party are a centralising party. They don't really like local government. I want that written in. So our councils can have much greater power and financial resources. And beyond PR and stronger local democracy, there are things that I think the Labour Party wouldn't want to give us. Strong commitment to civil liberties. That would be important for me because I know Labour wouldn't want that. And the other thing Labour would try to wriggle out is getting money to our areas. in government, there's often, lots of games played. People trying to grab the money for their constituencies and their targets. We would have to make sure right from the very start that our heartlands, be they in southwest London or the southwest of our country, that we have a commitment to the key projects that we could show the people in Devon and Cornwall we had won. And I'd want them written in from the start. So that's how I negotiate. I make sure that by the time we've left that table, by the time we've left that room, they are crying because they didn't want to give me what I've won.
Thank you, Ed. And Ed, stand by there, because we have a question from someone who I'm sure you both know. It's called Adrian Sanders.
Yeah.
And Adrian asks, the first paragraph of the preamble to the party's constitution calls for none to be enslaved by poverty. We have a post-COVID 60 billion deficit. Should we amend our preamble, or do you have a plan? And I don't want to get into the COVID debate at the moment, because I'll come on to that in a minute. Ed.
I've only known Adrian since 1989, Robin. Adrian, great question. We have got to keep the fight on for tackling poverty, for making ourselves a fairer society, a more equal society, deficit or no deficit. And, I think this deficit that we've got now is very, very different from the one we had in 2007-8, different by scale, but also different because the debt servicing costs are very low. And as we heard from the governor of the Bank of England, a private briefing yesterday, Andrew Bailey, he made clear that the authorities believe that these low debt servicing costs are going to continue for a long time. That means we shouldn't worry so much about the debt. And he also made a point, which is something I've been arguing, is that a lot of the debt that we've accumulated to combat COVID is on the balance sheet of the Bank of England. So we owe the money to the Bank of England, but who owns the Bank of England? Well, we do. So I don't want to restrict our fight against poverty, our fight against climate change, our fight to make sure our children get the best chance in life by paying back ourselves. That's a bit crazy, yeah? And if we learn from what happened after the Second World War, when we had far higher debts as a share of our national income than even now, we didn't actually slash spending and we didn't not tackle inequality. We built the NHS, we built the welfare state, we built council houses. We did it then after the war when the debt was high. And the result, what we did was the war loans rolled over because they were at the Bank of England back then. And we grew with sustainable growth. So, Adrian, I could not be more committed to tackling poverty. That's why I'm talking about a greener, fairer, more caring society. We've got to be the party of social justice. We can't give Labour the monopoly on that. That's be appalling. And I believe we can afford it. And I would like to take, a slightly unorthodox approach to economics, but I think it's grounded in the reality. And as an economist by training, I've got a degree in postgraduate in economics. I put myself through night school at Birkbeck to get my postgraduate. I'm absolutely convinced I can argue this case in the hardest media grilling that's possible and make sure that the Liberal Democrats can come through.
Thank you, Ed. Leila.
Well, thank you, Adrian, for your question. And poverty and inequality in general is actually why I'm a Lib Dem. I was a teacher before I became an MP, but joined the party because I became very, very aware of how massive a difference there is in your life chances, depending on, frankly, how much money your parents have in this country. And a lot of that is driven by poverty. And we have to be a party that fights against it, because if we genuinely believe that everyone deserves an equal chance in life, if they are enslaved by poverty, they can't have that freedom. And so that's why we need to keep explaining to people why. It's why I'm fighting for a universal basic income right now, which, to be honest, I wasn't really sure about before COVID-19, but COVID-19 has really made me come on board this idea, because that is how we're going to stop those families that are currently really, really struggling right now, and universal credit is not working, to help them in the future. But the thing that we need to make the case for, and this is where actually we really need to rebuild credibility on this issue, is that we will promise, and I will promise as leader, that we will not go back to austerity politics. there were a lot of people who were hurt, not least because of cuts to local authority funding, who didn't have that safety net behind them, who didn't have the support systems around their families, who were hurt by the bedroom tax, who were hurt by these big changes that government made. And that was then supercharged after coalition, because frankly, we were a moderating force, and the Tories have just made it worse and worse and worse. And their instinct is not going to be to protect the poor. And ours has to be. We have to fight against that. And if we're going to do that with any kind of credibility, we have to show people that we are a party that believes in eradicating poverty in our country, but also to do it everywhere, and that it's not a recovery that is London centric and Southeast centric, which is another concern that I have. And, you know, as I said earlier, they talk about a levelling up agenda. They only ever mention the North. The complacency that they're showing in places like Devon and Cornwall, I think need calling out, and we're the party to do it. So we need regional industrial strategies where we are mindful of the fact that tourism industry is falling, that we need to find a way of propping people up through this difficult period. We can be the party to talk about this, and in the longer term, make sure that the books are not balanced in any way off the backs of the poor ever again.
Leila, thanks. Thank you for that. And I now have a question that's coming again on the YouTube chat line. So we're keeping a good eye on that for our members out there. And it's from Sarah Martin, and it comes back to a subject that's absolutely live at the moment, and indeed is why this hustings is a virtual one, which in some ways actually works out more inclusive in some ways. More people can attend than maybe the ones we normally have in Plymouth for these occasions. And she asks, are both of you happy with the Lib Dem response in opposition to the government's handling of the pandemic? Do you feel that we are being outspoken enough? So Leila, I'd like you to start on that one, please.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Well, first of all, I mean, the government has made a complete mess of this, and we have all throughout this process been talking to the media, talking to our own constituents, feeding back. I mean, the day that we went into lockdown, my post bag tripled in size, which in my constituency meant that we were just absolutely snowed under. And mainly what it was, and interestingly, when you get big spikes like that, it's not a 38 degrees petition that's gone round. These were individuals who were losing their jobs, who were scared, who were being asked to go into non-COVID secure work and feeling like they were on the front line. It's through this period that I delivered the coronavirus compensation scheme, because we saw NHS and social care workers putting their lives on the line. And I got contacted by a local constituent who was a radiographer in the local hospital saying, I need to know the security for my family if I pass away. And I worked cross-party, including with backbench Tories, including with the Daily Express newspaper of all people, to get this done. And now there's £60,000 that is given to those grieving families off the back of the campaign that I ran from start to finish. So we do need to be calling them out on what they're getting wrong. And that's why I've pulled together a cross-party group, an all-party parliamentary group that I'm chairing, that is leading the rapid inquiry into coronavirus now. We constituted nearly 2 weeks ago. We're having our first oral evidence session on Wednesday. And the purpose of that group is to pull together what has gone wrong so far so that we can avert a second wave, because a lot of people, and Ed included, have been calling for a public inquiry, and so have I. My concern with the public inquiry is that it won't start until after this is over, after we have a chance to save lives. So I've been working in the House on this part now so that we can then put forward recommendations, take evidence from bereaved families, from NHS workers, from social care workers, from the scientists, so that we can pull together recommendations in a way that actually I hope the government will take on board and expose the Tories actually for the mess that they have created in this period. People's lives matter. And if we don't get the government to listen and change their approach, then my concern is that we are going to face a much bigger wave in autumn winter that is going to be potentially even worse than the first. And I'm leading that charge.
Thank you, Leila. Ed, it's your turn.
Friends, we absolutely have to hold this shambolic government to account. Britain has one of the worst death rates in the whole world. In Europe, we have the worst death rate for health and care workers. This is a disgrace. And we have been calling out the government. In fact, we've led most of the calls, but they drown people out. But I'm delighted to say that I was the first politician to call for an independent inquiry back in April. And I've been working for an independent inquiry behind the scenes and in public, in the media, in Parliament, ever since. And I'm pretty proud, actually, that last Wednesday I tracked the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's questions, and he's now admitted there will be a independent inquiry. Previously, he wriggled out, he wouldn't say, and I got the question, and we got him. We got massive coverage for it, huge coverage, some of the best we've had for a long, long time. And you know, that is showing that the Liberal Democrats can, if you're properly led and really well focused, with determination and with persistence, we can win. And in fact, we're the ones who've done that. The Labour Party haven't, Keir Starmer hasn't, the SNP haven't. It's the Liberal Democrats who've now got on record there will be an independent inquiry so that this government will be held to account. Because holding to account is not just now and in the last week, last month, it will be in the future. Because I think they've been so shambolic in all aspects, in education, in health, in testing and PPE, and the shocking betrayal of the care homes, that I think this could be a massive issue that ultimately loses them the next election. So it's the reason I focused on it, and the reason I've called for an immediate inquiry. I've written to the Prime Minister after I won that concession in the House last Wednesday. I've asked for it to be as soon as possible. I've asked to make sure that they publish before the recess who that's going to chair it, what the terms of the criteria are for the inquiry. I've also made sure and urged the Prime Minister to make sure that it's under something called the Inquiries Act 2005. I don't mean to get technical on you, but you can have inquiries whatever you like. The one that matters will be under the Inquiries Act 2005, because under that you have real power, real teeth to demand people come to give evidence, to demand all the paperwork. They can't wriggle out of it as they can with other inquiries. And I've made it clear that we need that urgently so we can learn the lessons in case there's a second wave. So we've made some progress holding to account, but let me give you one really good example of things that I want to use in the campaigns ahead when we call them to account on COVID. And that's a certain Liberal Democrat, a lady called Kirsty Williams. Kirsty is a Liberal Democrat, Welsh member of the Assembly in Cardiff. And she's actually in coalition with the Labour Party. She's the Education Minister. And she has served the schools of Wales, the parents and the children, the young people of Wales, so much better than Gavin Williamson has done with the children and schools in England. And I want to give a compare and contrast. If you have a Liberal Democrat in charge of education, you have someone with Kirsty Williams' skills and ability, you actually get the help to the children who need those school meals, the children who haven't got the computers and the Wi-Fi. She has been amazing. And we need to talk about her as well as holding the government to account, as I've really started the process to do.
Okay, thank you, Ed. And please stand by for the next question, which is from Tim Moran. And you might find it's a little bit of a reflection of some of those answers we've just had. Tim asks, our education, or he observes, our education system is suffering from significant underfunding, which despite the best efforts of school staff is having quite negative effects on our youngsters. And so Ed, would you like to start us on that, please? And if I could ask both of you to keep your answers a little bit tighter than they've been recently. Thank you.
Sorry. Well, I think our schools are underfunded generally, wherever the children and young people are. We have problems here in Southwest London where, frankly, they're tearing the head teachers who I talk to on a regular basis are tearing their hair out. They can't make the budgets work. But there are parts of the country who have even a worse deal. And I know, for example, in Cornwall, your average secondary school, the children are funded £200 less than they are in my constituency. That's clearly not fair. So we need to have more money in the pot overall for all children wherever they are. And we need to sort out the formula so we don't get those unfairnesses, and schools in Cornwall and Devon are underfunded compared to other parts of the country. This is an issue that I've campaigned on all my life. When I was the economics advisor to Paddy Ashdown in the early 90s, I helped develop the policy with Matthew Taylor of raising income tax by a penny in order to get a massive injection of cash into education. And that was our most popular policy in 92, 97 and 2001. So I couldn't be more committed to state education and to getting extra money into our schools.
Leila.
Well, thank you, Tim. As you can imagine, as a former teacher, this is an issue really close to my heart. It's why education is the first of the 3 pillars of my campaign for leader. And the reason why is because actually, is there any better expression of liberalism than wanting to invest in our children, in our next generation, and getting them to really thrive? But the problem we have actually in our education system, and fighting against school funding cuts has been a large part of what I've done as our education spokesperson over the last 3 years. The biggest day I had in the last general election, when I had that sort of 8-10 slot on the Today programme, was when I announced our education funding pledges and got to spar with Nick Robinson over them. And they were really well received by not just the profession, but also parents and also local councils. Because the other thing that I've been pushing as vice chair of the F40 group in Parliament, these are the councils that are underpaid by the funding formula. We want to change how that funding formula works so that Devon and Cornwall and other parts of the country that don't get the fair share of funding are better funded. But it's more than just money. We need a system that very genuinely has at its heart children. And at the moment it doesn't. It's a system that doesn't make them world ready. You could argue it makes them exam ready, but not world ready. It doesn't adequately support them. We need a broader curriculum, one where they don't have that narrow track of, you know, you will pass through these hoops, and if you don't pass through those hoops, then you are a failure. And too many children right now, especially those from poorer backgrounds, just aren't having their needs met. So the way that I want to change our education system is, yes, let's make it well funded, but let's also make sure that it's a system that works for every child in this country, not just the middle classes.
Thank you, Leila, and thank you, Ed. Thank you, both of you. That's a good, concise answers on that. I'm going to change the pace just a little bit, because I have a question which I think I would ask if I was out there, which is from Stephen Jolly, and it says, or he asks, what are your 3 proudest achievements in politics? And I'm going to be counting up to 3 only. Leila.
Well, one is winning this seat and then increasing its majority. As I said, actually, I'll be honest, I wasn't totally expecting to overturn 10,000 all in one go. And then also thinking that we had sort of exhausted that vote in 2017 to then increase it to over 50% in the last election was some achievement. And we did that by building a massive campaign team that was actually not just Liberal Democrat activists. And the ability to do that in a lot of our seats that are Tory facing, where we've got fantastic activists, many of whom have contributed to these questions tonight, but also bolstering our campaigning effort. That's what we need to do. We need to join forces with those people who want to take it to the Tories. And I've got a track record and a plan for how we can roll that out nationally. So that's certainly one. The second is actually something that is not launched yet, but is coming. And it is a Future Perfect Education Commission that I brought together the unions, I brought together industry, the TBI have contributed to, I brought forward academics. And what we're trying to do there is to change that debate. I spoke in the last question about having an education system that made children world ready, but actually the next thing is how do we make sure that we have cross-party support to do this. And education takes a lifetime, and so it can't just be the endeavour of one sole political party, and I want to make real change in this area. But the third is really very practical, and I spoke earlier about that coronavirus compensation scheme, and the reason why I'm so proud of it is because actually what we need to now do as Lib Dems is not show people what we would do in some sort of fictitious government of the future, or, you know, even necessarily say that that's what we did in the past, so therefore we can do it now. People want to know, and this is what people on doors in Devon and Cornwall were telling me, what are you going to do for me now? What are you going to do for me now? And so by delivering things like the coronavirus compensation scheme, we can affect real change in people's lives now. And they're going to really appreciate that if we can pump that message out, get them to understand that the Liberal Democrats are not just this small force. Actually, we are an influential force in Parliament. And the next time that they've got to vote at a ballot box, whether it be at a local party, local council level or at a national level, they will understand that the reason to vote Lib Dem is because they get stuff done for me and my family now.
Thank you, Leila. Ed, over to you.
My three things were one on the environment, one on equality, and one on human rights. On the environment, I nearly quadrupled Britain's renewable power. I fought the Tories and won. And I signed off more solar farms and wind farms than any British politician in history. We became the world leader in offshore wind. And the reason why coal power stations are no longer on the system is because of what I, with you, the Liberal Democrats, what we achieved. So I am pretty proud of that. On equality, moving the amendment to get rid of the homophobic section 28. You know, alongside our achievements on same-sex marriage, I think we have a record second to none of a party, and I was proud to have played a part in that. And then I think of the many constituents I've worked for over the last 20 years, and it's been many. I do 2 advice surgeries a week, so I know all the stuff about housing and the benefits from the Gambia by the CIA, illegally rendered to the black hole in Bagram Airport in Afghanistan, where he was tortured. And then he was taken to Guantanamo Bay. And he was kept there for 4 years without being told what he'd done. He was never charged. And I worked with an American lawyer, and I worked in Parliament. I worked in the Foreign Office. It took me 5 years. I went to Washington twice. I went to the State Department. I went to the Pentagon, and I campaigned for the release of my constituent. And it didn't make me very popular. You know, he was an alleged Islamic terrorist. He wasn't, but that was the allegation. And I had people in the Sun newspaper, in the other parts of the media, having a go at me, even in my own constituency. But if you're a Liberal Democrat, you stand up for people who are treated badly. You stand up for their rights, their civil liberties. And I couldn't be more proud of having got Bishop Al-Rouri out of Guantanamo Bay and going to visit him in West London, where he now lives with his wife, who he married after his release, and his 3 young children. He's a law-abiding citizen. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was guilty by association. We should be ashamed of having worked with the Americans on that, and I'm really proud that I got him out and I stood up for human rights.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Leila, and thank you both for those. It's good to hear what what real practical being a member of Parliament actually means and does. I'm going to move on to quite a precise question here from Tams in Hereford, who asked, how many times have each of you been to Cornwall? I'm going to modify this slightly, I'll warn you. And how well do you know the range of constituents in our county? Also, how do you propose to reach all voters with consistency to get a win again? Now, the win again is particularly important, but in terms of visits, I'm going to say Devon and as well as Cornwall, obviously. And let's say since about, I don't mean an exact amount, but probably since about 2017, rather than going back into ancient history. But Ed, over to you.
Well, I'd say if you'd gone back a long time, I lost count because I've holidayed and I've got friends in both counties and have campaigned with local government friends and parliamentary candidates over many years now. Since 2017, probably about 4 times. Maybe 5, but I love going. So if ever I get the chance, you'll get me there. Not least because I do have quite a number of friends in the party who live there and campaign hard. And that's the point about winning again. I think we're a bottom-up party though, and the leader's job is to give that vision and communicate it on the media. My vision of a greener, fairer, more caring society. And on the media, over 20 years, I've dealt with all the tough interviews, whether it's Andrew Neil, whether it's John Humphreys, whether it's Kathy Newman, Sophie Ridge. You know, I've been there and done it, and I like to think I've come out having got the Liberal Democrat message across. So that would be my job. But my job, I guess, will always also be to make sure that we are building up those teams. We're changing the way we've been campaigning the last few years because it's not been very good. You know, I'm delighted, I'm proud, I should say, of having co-commissioned the general election review that Dorothy Thornhill did so well. I'm delighted to have her support in this leadership election. And in that general election review, she talks about how we need to change the party quite radically if we're going to win again, and make sure the National Party doesn't interfere, but actually supports and enables. And that's the sort of thing I would want to do. And whether it was working with Danny Chambers in North Cornwall or Alex White in North Devon, you know, all the candidates you've got, and of course at council level in the key elections next year and the year after, you know, I will come down, I will campaign with you. It will be a pleasure.
Good. Leila.
So in order to come and speak to voters, it was actually after the 2019 general election. Before that, I was very focused on holding Oxford West and Abingdon, which was a marginal. I'd only won it by 800 votes in 2017, and I was a brand new MP. So I was really focused on there. And I have to say, having been to Devon and Cornwall many, many, many times before being elected, the first couple of years of being an MP, I didn't get much holiday, but I have been on holiday there before. I've got lots of friends there and absolutely loved it. And going back this time and visiting in North Devon, I went to Penzance, I went to North Cornwall, and I thank all those activists who came out with me because we had such fun. I found that actually the voters there and I just clicked, absolutely got on the doors. And it was fantastic. I remember in particular going outdoor knocking in Camelford and had some slow conversations with people, chatting to them about what they really care about. But actually, I need to do more of this. And I think that the worst thing that the leader can do is assume, given the state of our poll rating, given the state of how badly we've done in the last few elections, that we don't challenge the fact that actually I need to do this more. In the first year of being leader, I want to tour the country and come back to Devon and Cornwall and actually experience other parts of it. And I hope, Tamsin, you might take me out and show me some of those places that actually maybe have a different point of view, and there are places that could get voting Lib Dem again, because the job of the leader isn't to create the policies. That, I would argue, is the job of the party. I would also argue it's the job of the local parties and the presidents, and we absolutely need to make sure we've got that campaigning force behind that message, those policies that the party develops. But actually the job of the leader is to turn all of that stuff into the poetry. And if I don't have my finger on the pulse of what an average person in your areas thinks, then we aren't going to speak to people's hearts again. And that's what we need to do to bring them along. So I want to come meet your farmers, I want to come meet your fishermen, I want to come and make sure that we continue to have those conversations. We've got some time between now and 2024, and we need to start turning the tide on the decline that we've seen in voting in parts of Devon and Cornwall. We need to make sure that we are on the up, not continuing on the down.
Thanks, Leila. That's good. Right, I'm going to, I've got a question from Nick Cole, which is around something that concerns many people, which is the power of local councils. And he says in particular, tourism is our bedrock product and requires local decision making and funds. How can we get back local democracy to develop our local tourism to match our resort? Leila.
So this is why next May is so important. We have amazing work being done in Cornwall, in Devon, in Torbay, you know, places where we've got leadership of those councils in various ways. But what we absolutely need to do is to get more councillors, because we know that Lib Dem councils deliver for their communities. And our job in Westminster is to make the case for why more money should be coming to those councillors and those councils so that they can turn the tide. There has never been a better register of small businesses than there is now because of the small business grants. And what the Tories want to do with the big reorganisation of local government that they're proposing is actually strip away democracy from the ground. My liberal roots tell me that I want decision-making powers to be as close as possible to the communities that they affect as possible. More money should be going to councils. And I'm seriously concerned that through COVID, the government made a promise that councils would be fully reimbursed for all the costs of COVID-19. And yet they haven't honoured that promise. Not only are they facing increased costs for the actual cost of COVID and the cost of social care and the cost to the groups and the shielding that they've been asked to do, but actually on top of that, they've been losing funding from business rates and others sources of income through this period. We have to make the case to government for why they should replace it. Interestingly enough, there is some movement across the House, not just from our own benches to do this, but the government, I just don't think get it. And if we want to start going on a rant of how much I dislike Robert Gendrick, that would take another half an hour. So I'd probably best stop there.
Okay, Leila, thank you. And Ed.
Nick, thank you for this. As I said earlier, I believe we need to really strengthen local democracy. That gives councils more power and more resources. And how can we do it in the short term, even campaign for it in this parliament? One thing I think we should really go for is council tax on second homes. While there are ways you can do it, I think they're not strong enough. Second homes are a problem in many rural areas, including parts of Cornwall and Devon. And I think one of the ways you could raise some money locally is by being given that extra resources, which might both discourage the second homes, which can cause problems in some villages and towns, but also for those that stay, raise some money so you can both help the local area, local families with affordable housing, but also use it to beef up the tourism industry. And I think one needs to try to make sure local authorities got serious money again. Cornwall Council, for example, is totally underfunded. They've had to add £74 million to their budget this year alone because of COVID. And they've got 40 million back from the government, but that means they're 34 million pounds down. So local authority resources is absolutely critical. I'd like to see councils having more power to raise their own resources as well, of course. But in the meantime, we've got to argue, and I've already started doing it in Westminster, that more money should come down. And it would absolutely help Nick on the tourist industry, but it could help much more. Final point I make is on business rates. I've been a Liberal Democrat for a long time, and many of the liberal radical ideas are ones that I've subscribed to. And some of you might raise your eyebrows at this, but land value tax is something I'm quite into. And we have a policy in the party at the moment to replace the unfair business rates with a land value tax. That would be particularly helpful in places like Cornwall and Devon, in the villages and towns where small businesses are struggling. And all the evidence that shows, there was a great study by the Liberal Democrat Business and Entrepreneurs Network into this policy. It would really cut the local tax bills of businesses in areas like Devon and Cornwall. So that's one policy I'd like to push very hard, along with the idea of taxing council home second homes more and supporting local government with more funding.
Thank you, Ed. We're getting towards the end of the session, and I've certainly been enjoying it, and great answers from you both. I'm going to do two more questions and then your final statements. And just to say, on local democracy, we've had a number of questions about that, and there was one also from Florence MacDonald, who was one of our great campaigners in the last general election. So I think that covered that as well. But I have a question now from Adrian Lancaster, and we'll have you first, Ed, then. And it gets back to basics, really. What lessons did you learn from the most recent general election, and what would your plan be to increase the number of Lib Dem MPs? And I'm trying to keep it fairly tight. Over to you, Ed.
Well, there are some lessons that won't apply in the future because it was a very particular election. But the message that I really take away is the fact that we just told people about one policy. We wanted to stop Brexit, and I'm passionate about stopping Brexit, but I'm a Liberal Democrat for many more reasons as well. And our failure to get over the other reasons for voting Liberal Democrat, that was a very, very big failure. And I found in recent elections, we've been just failing to do that. And, whether it's on the green agenda, the climate change agenda, which I'm talking about a lot, whether it's on the fairness agenda, particularly investment in education and public services, whether it's on the caring agenda that I'm talking about, investing in social care through local authorities, supporting carers more. These are messages I think would resonate with huge numbers of people. And they're more relevant to people's lives because although Brexit was the issue, do you know what? Huge numbers of people don't really care. They had to have a view because it was dominating politics, but they didn't really care. And by just focusing on an issue which for many people was, not the massive issue in their lives, we didn't talk to the voters. I know in my constituency, I'm absolutely sure it's true of every constituency in Cornwall and Devon. When I got on the doorsteps, actually Brexit wasn't as big an issue as we made it and as the media made it. And we made a big mistake there as a party. So under my leaderships, I would make sure that we would speak to people. So we would increase the number of Liberal Democrat MPs. If they heard more about what we stand for, we'd get more MPs. And, I would also want to change the campaigning strategy where you had all these national leaflets coming in when you didn't know that they were coming in. They were not on the right message. That was a disaster. And that's why the general election review, which I co-commissioned with some very strong findings, has to be implemented. So it's the message issue at the big picture, but also those nitty gritty campaign organization issues, which we have to get right.
Thank you, Ed. Leila.
Well, actually, rather than just assuming that I knew what voters in Devon and Cornwall thought about our last general election effort, that's why I came out and spoke to them and spoke to some of you and wanted to continue to do this. COVID intervened. I was doing it in all sorts of places around the country. So I'll tell you what voters were telling me. And it was two things. One was about revoke. It wasn't just about Brexit in general. It was specifically about revoke. And the reason why revoke went down so badly was because you had this situation where on the one hand, we're telling people we're a bottom-up democratic party. We believe that you should have that final say. I helped to launch the people's vote. It was our main message for so long. And then in that conference, and failing to recognize the bubble within the bubble within the bubble that our own party had become, we failed to see how badly that was going to go down on doors. And actually at that point, we sold the Southwest down the river in terms of campaigning, because once revoke started landing on doors, that's when voters were telling me they just switched off, because we were a party that said we cared about one thing. We care about you, the voter, and your democratic right to decide the future of this country. And they could just about swallow the people's vote, a lot of them, but they did not like revoke because it felt so top down, and that somehow on this sort of 25-30% in the polls, we're going to impose this on the country. It just felt wrong. The way that voters feel about these things really matters. And I defended revoke. Technically, if we formed a majority government on that basis, then we would have a mandate. It just felt wrong. And that's why we need to get that sense of how will voters feel about it? Not just, is it intellectually pure? I mean, how many of our policies are intellectually fantastic and then don't land on doors in the right way? But the second thing that they said to me, and I think this is a really important thing that we need to take on board as a party, is that they really felt that we were far too metropolitan, London-centric, Westminster-centric, and actually what they wanted to see more of us nationally was some of the brilliant stuff that happens locally. And that's why, as part of my campaign, I really want us to focus on those bread and butter issues again. The education, the environment, the economy, these were things that were resonating not just in Devon and Cornwall, but also in Labour-facing areas elsewhere in the country that we also needed to win. And if we're going to spend a day talking about, gender-neutral school uniforms or whatever, actually, you almost earn the right to do that by talking most about the issues that really, really matter to people on the doors. So we need to do nationally what we already do locally. We need to go out in our communities. We need to find out what really makes them tick. We need to campaign on it. It's why I've been working with the Daily Mail, of all people, for example, on protecting our farmers and challenging Liz Truss to eat a meal of chlorinated chicken and hormone-fed beef, because actually, if we're not going to talk about the issues that really matter on doorsteps and really matter to our farmers, then people are going to continue to feel that we are a party that is far too London-centric and far too Westminster focused. And this needs to change, or we're not going to win back those voters again.
Leila, thank you. We're coming up to 8:30, so I'm going to actually move into the final statements now. Can I thank everybody who gave questions? We had a few which I couldn't get through, but I think we covered most of the subjects that people asked. So we're going to do it in reverse order this time round, and each of you has 2 minutes to sum up what you want to say to our members here in Devon and Cornwall, and of course the Isles of Scilly, which we sometimes forget about
Yes.
as well. So Ed, over to you, and you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you for all your questions, and thank you to Robin and Jackie for organising this. I believe I'm the right person to be the next leader of our great party, because I think I can get us back to winning ways. With my 30 years in the party, 20 years campaigning, 6 out of 7 general election victories, I think I know what it takes to win seats. My wife's a councillor on Kingston Council. I know how important winning at council level is, and I think I can appeal to those soft Tories who are concerned, want to make sure we're strong on business and on the economy, and I can appeal to those soft Labour people we need to squeeze, particularly in most of our seats, not least because of what I've got to say on the social justice agenda and the caring agenda, and because I think we can have an understanding with Keir Starmer. So my focus as leader will be on making sure we're ready to win from day one, making sure the local elections and the Scottish, Welsh and London elections in 2021 get the dynamism, the push that they need. And I'll bring my message to the party and to the country. A vision of a greener, fairer, more caring society. And we don't know quite what the election battleground will be yet, but it's going to almost certainly be on jobs and health. And we've got to have a distinctive message on jobs and health. And on jobs, the green economy that I'm talking about is, I think, distinctive for us. And we can make it distinctive, particularly because of the track record of the party and my own personal track record on the green jobs front. And if it's on health, I want us to be distinctive. While the other parties are talking about hospitals and nurses and doctors, I want us to talk about social care. We know that the care sector has been dramatically underfunded. People have seen that when Boris Johnson said protect the NHS and forgot the care homes, that it ended in tragedy. So I think we can be the champions for the care sector and thus on health. So let's be distinctive, let's be liberal, and let's win again. Let's make sure we learn the lessons of general election review, and we have a leader who can not only cut through on the media, as I've been doing for 20 years, but also a leader who can appeal to all these people across the country, and particularly in Devon and Cornwall. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Leila, and you have 2.5 minutes if you want it.
Thank you so much, Robin. Well, first of all, thank you to you all. I've really enjoyed tonight. It's been fantastic. And all your brilliant questions remind me that, I mean, as Paddy used to say, our party, the Lib Dems, are at our best when we are fizzing with ideas. And as leader, I want to continue to inspire our members to contribute to what could be an amazing time for our country. COVID-19 has been awful, but we need to show people that there is a progressive, bold, liberal agenda, a positive message to give them. Otherwise, they aren't going to have the resilience to keep going through these difficult times. And we can be the party to do that. We're a nationwide party of activists and campaigners, and not just in Parliament, but on the ground in our local councils. And more than ever, people want to hear from us about bread and butter issues, about a progressive liberal agenda of a greener, fairer, more compassionate society. But the challenge for our party is that steady as she goes is not good enough. We need to rebuild and we have to rebuild support and trust in our communities from top to bottom. Electing me as our leader sends a clear signal to voters that we've learned from the mistakes of the past and that we are moving forward. And we need to take this fight to Boris Johnson and this horrendous Conservative government. I have a proven track record of beating the Tories, but not just that, also getting Labour and the Greens to not just not fight us, but campaign with us so that we are a force on the ground to show people what they are doing. For too long, our hardworking activists and campaigners have spent hours explaining our party's actions. And instead, what we need to do is to put forward a positive, progressive vision. We have to show people that we understand them. And that's why I've put forward a platform of education, the economy, and the environment, as well as making the case for electoral reform and devolution of power. A vote for me is a vote for us to move forward as a party so that we can win again. And we need to win again so we can change our country for the better. I will make liberalism mainstream again and appeal to that broad base of voters at a time when the country has never needed the Liberal Democrats more than they do now. Please vote for me to be your next leader. Thank you all.
Well, Leila, Ed, thank you very much indeed. It's been a great evening, and it's always good to see you down here in the far southwest. And I hope that whatever happens in this particular leadership campaign, you'll both visit us regularly. You'll both be very, very welcome. And I'm virtually applauding here anyway to the performance tonight. Thank you so much. Just some housekeeping, just to say to everybody that the ballots should be out on the 30th of this month by email or by post if you are not on email, and they have to be returned by the 26th of August, as I understand it, and the results on the 27th. So that's the timetable. Can I thank very much Jackie Gammon for helping me and being absolutely essential in terms of guiding me through the questions tonight. And can I also thank Greg and Georgia from the Lib Dem HQ for making this thing actually happen and making sure that we all know, Jackie and I, what we've been doing. So that's been great as well. So thank you all very much indeed. Make sure you're voting the leadership campaign. Tell everybody else about it. And that is the end of this session. And thank you so much to everybody for your questions.